Hi everybody, Scott here. In this video I'm finally going to do an INFJ's take on the INTJ. Now in this video, like all of my INFJ take videos, this is an exploration of the type, and it's my take on the type, or you could say my current take on the INTJ. So in it I like to take what I guess we all know about the MBTI and the INTJ and attempt to look a little deeper, or look at the type from different angles, just to see if there's more to discover, more to understand. And so when I come to these videos, there's a sense of knowing something, but not assuming that I do know. And so I like to use language like it seems like, it appears like, I get the sense like, these sorts of things, because it's an exploration and I'm attempting to discover things. And to a large degree, I often discover things while making the video. And so I come to it open as opposed to closed. However, that can just lead to like longer videos, and me maybe circling around an idea a couple of times until I land on something or I spot something. So this isn't a video for people that want a quick, sharp and concise description of the type. This is for people that maybe have a good understanding of the INTJ, or a understanding, and would seek to know more, or look at it from different angles, look at the type from different angles. So with saying all of that, I just invite the INTJs that might watch this video for your feedback, because I get the sense sometimes some of the things that I say may not fully land, but it might be leading in a direction for a deeper understanding. And so while I might say something that doesn't quite land, you could get the sense of where I'm going or what I'm trying to speak to. And it could just be, what I'm saying could be just an initial statement to help sort of lead us to where the hunch, if you like, could lead us. So just welcome feedback, your own insights, things that resonate with you, and maybe even things that don't resonate. So just welcome that. One thing I sort of notice with INTJs, with their introverted intuition, there's that real sense of their openness to information, and in a sense an openness to you, the one sharing information. There's a real sort of open broadness of taking in what's being said. And in that sense, there can be this sense of you could say almost accommodating, or a very inclusive, very just open to whatever's being said, however it's being said, because it's just sort of feeding that NI part of them for them to evaluate the information. But then there's the TE, and what can happen is that the way the INTJ communicates or even responds to the other person can feel very different for the other person than what they initially felt with their NI openness. And what I mean is there can be this kind of this gentle NI openness, but then with this sort of solid TE response. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a criticism at all. It's just something that some people could experience with the INTJ, at least initially, like initial interaction. There can be this open warmth feeling from NI, but then this the strong solidness of the TE response. And so for some people, it could feel like a push-pull to them if they don't have the understanding of where the INTJ is coming from. So someone could get the false impression that of that NI, while it is open, it's open to the ideas and open to what's being communicated, in a sense more so than the person that is doing the sharing, let's say. Not that the INTJ is not interested in people, you could say that the INTJ is more interested in ideas than people, but it's not a bad thing, like it's not a negative thing. But for the person who's engaging with the INTJ could feel like that Ni openness is to them as an individual as opposed to the idea. And then when the INTJ responds, the TE has that solidness, and it could feel like a push back, whether of the person or just a pushback generally, when looked at in contrast to the Ni openness. So I think there's just some things in there in that I think is worth noting. So I think because the INTJ, they can have a very quiet disposition, very unassuming. They're there. They're not hiding. They're just observing. They're soaking it in. They're taking it in. And I think that what's generally happening is their NI is just absorbing what's going on, what's being said, and they're filtering it through themselves to lead to the formation of their ideas and their systems. And again, like I said before, that could be quite a contrast to when they actually do have something to say, or especially when something that's being said is really pushing against what they know to be true, or some part of their value system that they feel is important to clarify or to correct in some respects. And that's when the TE, it's like it can sort of jump into the conversation or jump into the moment, and that could be, again, it's really about how other people experience the INTJ, when they could be just very like quiet observers and just sitting there, a part of it but quietly, and then there can be the strong TE delivery of their idea or their thought or so on. Again, nothing wrong with it, just different. And generally speaking, the INTJ with that Ni openness will very much just allow someone to communicate, to share their idea or to share their opinion. And I think for the most part, the INTJ does value not interrupting people and letting people finish a thought. I think INTJs, maybe like INFJs, they have that sense that someone needs to finish a thought because a gem or something important could be said at the end of the statement. So for the general rule, the INTJ really leaves a lot of openness for people to finish their thought, because I think they also value when others let them finish their thought, and of course will feel potentially upset if their thought that's been communicated gets cut off. So the only time I think an INTJ will cut somebody off, it's not to be rude. I think it's usually because something important is being said that may need a clarification, or they feel they may need to correct something in the conversation, or just highlight something that they feel is important for the other person to consider in regards to what they're saying, how they're responding. I think the INTJ, you could say that they very much prize autonomy, and that their ideas and even their physical space is not encroached upon. And while they have that Ni openness, they have that sort of TE boundary in a sense of, what they say kind of helps to protect or protect them, or you could say look after them. And some people could get the wrong idea that they think that they can persuade the INTJ. They sense that Ni openness and think that they can sort of persuade or talk an INTJ into something. And I think, generally speaking, INTJs really can't be talked into or persuaded or coerced in any way really at all. And in a sense, the more that they feel like they're being persuaded or like pushed into an idea or pushed into an opinion or pushed to do something, the more that TE is going to just shut it down, just cut it off. And the best way, I think, to engage with an INTJ is to be aware of that autonomy and respect the space, in a sense, respect the intellectual space, and put your ideas and opinions and thoughts and feelings out there, or your intentions or whatever it is, and trust whatever you get back is the truth of where they're at. And don't waste your energy trying to push or persuade or coerce an INTJ into your way of thinking or whatever. At least don't do it through, I guess where I'm trying to take it is that you'll only get an INTJ on board if your argument is sound. So it's going to be intellectually that they're going to be persuaded, so it's going to be through your ideas and your logic and your the soundness of that it's going to cause an INTJ to maybe shift their perspective or their thoughts or ideas on things. In a relational sense or relationship sense, the INTJ will probably let you know very quickly whether they're interested or not. And from that place, no amount of pushing or flirting and all of that sort of thing will probably get you very far at all. And in a sense, you can take what they're saying at face value and respect it, and in a sense, if they want you in their circle, you'll know it, and if they don't want you in their circle, you'll probably know it as well. I think the INTJ, in order to keep themselves amused and almost entertaining themselves, they can sometimes rely on sarcasm as a way to just keep their mind stimulated. I think just play like word games and things like that with themselves. If you're on the receiving end of it, if you're kind of in earshot or you're in a conversation where an INTJ might show some sarcasm, I think a lot of people think sarcasm is a form of passive aggressiveness, but I don't think that's true for the most part for the INTJ. I think it's them just entertaining themselves and enjoying, in a sense, their own mind, if you like. So I think with that NI quietness that I referred to earlier, I think a misconception can be that the INTJ is like a wallflower, and associate that with weakness or awkwardness, or that they don't know how to handle themselves or hold themselves. Again, I don't think that's the case, generally speaking, for the INTJ. I think they can be wallflowers, but not with the awkwardness. It's mostly, I think, just through a logical choice that they don't really like being in the center of things. They like to be on the edge, absorbing and processing and thinking for the most part. So you could almost call them like the comfortable wallflower. I think maybe with the INTJ's TE, I wonder sometimes if they can feel misunderstood because they've got that introverted feeling part of them underneath, in a sense, in their cognitive stack it's underneath their TE, but like within themselves it's underneath. You sort of got this the TE extroverting of their thinking, and then they've got this deeper feeling part of themselves, and that FI can be sort of an elusive part to get for the INTJ to get to know, let alone other people to get to know, which I'll go into a bit more later. But I think there's an obvious thing going on where the INTJ can feel misunderstood a lot of the time and even judged for their TE as either cold or harsh or impersonal, these sorts of things. And I guess TE can be, or kind of is, an impersonal function, but I don't think that means that the INTJ is an impersonable person. I think there is a care for relationships, at least their close relationships. So I sometimes think, like the INFJ, they could feel misunderstood, but I also get the sense that the INTJ may not care too much about being misunderstood. So they may pick up on it, but then equally not really care about it. I'm not sure about that. I think it depends. Maybe in a relationship they might care more than if it's more like a workplace or something of a less personal nature. One thing I've observed with the INTJ is they seem to have perfected the FE smile a lot of the time. And I think in some respects it seems as though it's like, I'm sure there's the naturalness of smiling like every other human being, but there seems to be this thing where they've kind of observed their environment and recognized that they need to smile to just negotiate the external world and the external world of people. And so I'm not saying it's fake. I'm saying it's like it's naturally developed, but for maybe different reasons, like an FE Dom or extroverted feeling person in their stack. It's more of a unconscious, natural thing that occurs. But I think for the INTJ, there could be more of a conscious element to the developing of it, to some extent, in order to deal with the outside world. It's like it's needed, it's necessary. People, it works if they do the smiling thing more, and it's kind of like a way of dealing with the outside world. Again, on that one, I think maybe INTJ, just get INTJ's feedback on that and see if there's any truth to that. Again, I'm not saying that it's not natural, and I'm not saying that it's fake. I'm just maybe saying that the why of that developing part could be different. And the point that I wanted to make though about it is that the INTJs really perfected the smile. It's like it's almost like they can create the perfect smile. They've really perfected that part of themselves. And again, that could be people understand the INTJ smile. And again, not for everybody, not every INTJ, but I think there could be a vulnerability for people seeing the INTJ smile and understanding smiling from their own perspective, but it's not being used for the exact same reason that others smile, if that makes sense. And so it could be that Ni openness and the INTJ smile can sort of feel quite inviting, and potentially be a misunderstanding from others. It could be experienced by others in a way that feels like an invitation to get closer or be closer, but it's not. It's just I think just the INTJ being in the world and the way they need to be in the world, and then again, that sort of, there's that sort of TE that kind of keeps their boundary up, keeps themselves intact, you could say. I think there's a reality that the INTJ's Fi function, it seems like looking at the INTJ, it's almost like you can see the Fi vulnerability in them a lot of the time. Not that I think necessarily that the INTJ is even consciously aware of that vulnerability, or like has a conscious issue with that vulnerability, but that it kind of lurks underneath the surface. So almost like this thing underneath that that can kind of move a little bit underneath the surface, and it's kind of, even though it's third in the stack, there's kind of potentially an elusiveness to it. Like I can kind of see a lot of dynamic things going on in the sense of how the INTJ negotiates that part of themselves, and how others experience it, and maybe there's even sort of some frustration for the INTJ about wanting to access it more sometimes, or wanting to show more of the feeling side of themselves, but either not knowing how to, or being afraid to, because there's a sense that part of them is an elusive thing, and it's a harder discipline to master, if you like, the realm of feeling. So there's that comfort zone of the thinking, and some insecurity, for the most part with the feeling. And so there can be, I don't know if it's a love-hate relationship with the feeling side of themselves, but I'd just say maybe like a complicated relationship they have with their feelings. And I think what I'm saying is, I think sometimes that can be observed, that wrestling match, if you like, or I'm not sure exactly what you call it, but that it's almost like where the TE and the Fi meet, there is kind of something going on in between that, that some could observe in the INTJ, even if the INTJ is not necessarily aware of it, because it's kind of normal to some extent, like just normally kind of, in a sense, them being themselves, just dealing with what they think versus keeping what they feel or other people's feelings separate from their logic. And I think, sometimes there could be a bit of a dance that goes on the inside for the INTJ. So I think it might be sort of following on from that thought, this sort of Ni-Fi innocence about the INTJ. Like if we just, because essentially when the INTJ is not communicating, you could say that, basically when they're sitting observing or listening, they're in Ni, and maybe to some degree in Fi, and that there seems to be an innocence about that, versus when they communicate and their TE kind of really lets you know that they're alive, and that they have their autonomy and their opinions and their positions and their stance on things. But just bring it back to that point that I think Ni and Fi, just in and of itself, sitting there in the INTJ, could have an innocence about it, or even a vulnerability about it, but not that vulnerability is like them actually sitting there being vulnerable. I don't think that's usually the case. I think they're not vulnerable. But you could say that there exists an Ni-Fi vulnerability that sits there behind under the surface, if you like. but it's sort of a different kind of vulnerability. Maybe it's like a cognitive when we're looking at the cognitive functions, and from that perspective, it could look like vulnerability, but it's not like I have issues vulnerability, which has a different kind of an emotional, frequency to it. You could say it's almost like a cognitive, not quite right either, cognitive vulnerability, but just something there. Maybe INTJs watching, if there's anything in what I'm saying, could speak to that. I think for other people, it can be hard for others to know if they're being appreciated from the INTJ, because in a sense, if you're sitting there talking to an INTJ, the INTJ is having two conversations with you. They're having a conversation with you and with themselves, and they're engaging intellectually in that conversation, both with the other person and with themselves. And the INTJ is not too consciously focused on showing appreciation, or I guess you could say more that sort of FE gestures of validation and feeling understood, and making a good point that opens up a whole nother dialogue. They certainly can experience that for themselves in a conversation, but it's, I would say, for the most part, private. The INTJ can keep themselves quite contained. So I think the way to see if you're being appreciated is that they'll stick around. They'll stay in the conversation, or they'll continue a friendship. That essentially is them showing appreciation for who you are, and that they have value, that you have value in their lives. But I wouldn't necessarily be looking for like grand gestures of appreciation from the INTJ. The fact that you're allowed to stick around, in a sense, is them showing appreciation. There's a sense with the INTJ that like they're very private people, and they might be just as difficult to find as the INFJ in some respects, maybe even more so, when they're sort of locked away in their thoughts and ideas, and they're researching and sort of perfecting their theories of whatever it is that they're interested in. And I think there's a sense that for the INTJ, people are necessary, but they could live without them to some extent. No, it's not black and white there. But there's that sort of sense that it's almost like people are optional, even though we all need people. For the INTJ, I think sometimes people get in the way of, you could almost say, well, it's probably that the other people get in the way of the INTJ's relationship and interaction with themselves, which may seem shallow or self-centered or something like that, and I don't think that's really what's happening. I don't think it's self-centeredness at all. I think it's they do their best processing and their best processing when they're on their own, to kind of sift through their ideas and what they're learning, and build their structures, their logical systems, and the way that they see the world and so on. And I think sometimes, at least, people can get in the way of that process. It's almost like they're like the mystical, looking at it from the female perspective, it's like they're the mystical sort of princess locked in the tower, high above the city, but intentionally so. They want to be locked away up there to formulate their thoughts and opinions and ideas. I'm not sure what the male equivalent of that is. Maybe like the wizard, sort of locked away, in a cave somewhere, poring over their manuscripts. But there's just a sense of like privacy is highly valued. In fact, I think an INTJ's bedroom or their house are like sanctuaries. They're very much private, and yeah, it's like they don't let anyone into that space lightly. It's kind of like the house is almost like a extension of the metaphor, or the extension of their mind. That their mind is sacrosanct. It is. They guard it. They guard that space. They don't want anything, just anything or anyone in there. They guard it. And I think it's the same with like their physical space, their bedroom or their house. In a sense, they wouldn't let anyone and anything in through the door. And in a sense, it's a metaphor for if they're letting people through the door willy-nilly, they're opening themselves up to disturbance. Let's put it that way. And so, yeah, just I guess to finish the thought that their physical space can be an extension of their mental space. And so from that perspective, people need to respect their autonomy in their physical space. The INTJ will let you know if you're welcome in their space, and to what extent and in what way. And to that level, you appreciate, it's sort of to be appreciated and respected. And for that realm to be, it's almost like the INTJ will create for themselves an atmosphere to explore ideas, and they almost want to nurture, if you like, the intellectual space. And to the level that people are able to meet them in that respect is to the level that they will respond. To the level that the intellectual space is not respected and appreciated, or even the other not bringing value to it, will be to the level that the INTJ will probably distance and remove themselves from that space. So if you find yourself in the space of the INTJ and they're engaging with you, then consider yourself, I think, potentially like it's a rare space, I think, to some extent. Not that they're precious, and not that they're snobby and all of that. I don't think that's what this is about whatsoever. It's just some realities of the way the INTJ is, or they live in this world, and it's to our benefit, I think, that they're given not that they're given that space, but that they value their space and how to look after their space to get the best out of themselves, and from there they are able to contribute to the rest of the world. In the area of relationships, again with that whole issue of autonomy and independence, the INTJ is really looking for someone who can stand on their own two feet, intellectually, emotionally, financially. It's like it's counterintuitive, you could say, because it doesn't appear to hold sort of a romantic tone to it. That it's like, you know, when we think of like marriage and things like that, it's about like the two people becoming like one. But it's not an enmeshed one, it's two wholes becoming one whole, if you like. But there's always the awareness of the two and the one. And two feelers essentially are going to do that reality very differently. And thinkers are going to do it very differently as well. So it can have some relationship challenges when you've got a thinker and a feeler in the same space, because thinkers and feelers, I think, understand that like you could say the one flesh of marriage, or that joining together, they look at it very differently. And what two feelers would see as unity an INTJ or a thinker could see it as enmeshment and codependency and things like that. But for the most part, the INTJ will be looking for someone that won't smother them or lean on them in ways that that devalue independence and autonomy. So it could be a bit of a dance or a bit of a tricky space to negotiate about what connectedness and independence looks like within the context of let's say, a romantic relationship. I don't know if it means then that the INTJ sees attractiveness as secondary. Maybe that's just a case-by-case situation. But I think for the most part, the INTJ might be more prone to looking for those other things, their ability to be independent, their ability to stand on their own 2 feet and look after themselves, which the INTJ would see as something that she or he could connect to. It's like I can connect with the fact that they're independent, in a sense. I think for the INTJ in a relationship, there can always be that vulnerability, especially if they're in a relationship with a feeler, but you've got the feeler, let's say there's a disagreement or there's a conflict or something like that. Or even if it's not a conflict between the two people, but the INTJ is in a relationship with someone who's got a problem, got an issue that they're trying to communicate to the INTJ about. There can be this vulnerability of the INTJ / thinker separating the problem from the feeling when hearing the other person's situation, whereas the one with the issue wants to be heard on the feeling level and be validated and to have those feelings acknowledged before they can really go into solving a problem. And for a lot of people, especially feelers, but I don't think it's obviously just for feelers, but when there are emotional issues going on within a problem, it's the validating of the feelings that are being felt from the person that they're talking to that will either resolve the issue entirely or at least release them to then deal with the matter-of-fact nature of the problem. So sometimes I think the INTJ is vulnerable while they're trying to separate the emotion from the problem to get to the heart of the problem and solve it effectively and in like a time-effective manner, to not hear the emotional component and actually validate it. So acknowledging the feelings that are being felt in the other person, it will actually derail the problem solving for the other person and lead to it taking longer. So it's important for INTJs to be, if they're in a relationship with a feeler, to just logically start with acknowledging the feeling component that might exist within the other person's problem. And like I mentioned before, in some cases it could simply be acknowledging the emotional component of a person's problem that solves the problem. It's like, now that I've had my feelings validated, I don't really have much more to say. Or it could just enable the person to then get down into the heart of the problem once the feelings are acknowledged. So also for the other person, let's say that there's a feeling type or a different type in a relationship with an INTJ, and they're trying to get their feelings heard, and the INTJ is actually doing what I'm suggesting the INTJ not to, which is to just ignore or separate the problem, the feeling, from the problem, is to be able to acknowledge. And this, if a person is hurting, it's really hard to have this perspective in the midst of a problem. But to see that the INTJ, if they're doing that, it's because they care. They're separating emotionally from it all so that they can be more effective in helping to solve the problem. So it can be helpful for the other person to see, actually, the INTJ is caring. They're just caring differently to the way others do it, which is to focus in and acknowledge the emotional side of it. And that can sort of help short circuit a potential misconnection and even more hurt feelings by seeing that the INTJ is actually trying to be caring by not focusing in on the emotion to help solve the problem. And with that awareness, the person, if it's really important that those emotions get acknowledged, actually put the request out there to help the INTJ to help them. Looking at it more broadly, it's really about self-awareness for both sides. So for the INTJ, recognizing that acknowledging the emotions for this person over here helps them to solve the problem. But the INTJ is not always in that mindset because it's not natural for them to do that. So it'd be helpful for this person over here to recognize that when they're not having their emotions heard, it's not because they're not caring, the INTJ, it's that the INTJ is caring differently and stating more specifically what is needed, i.e. please hear my feelings here first, gives the INTJ an opportunity to do that, and then there's a connecting point that takes place there. I think a general rule that is good for people to consider when communicating with an INTJ is firstly having something to contribute intellectually to a discussion or a conversation. So the INTJ is really looking for a strong mind, for someone that's done some thinking themselves and has opinions, but also has the ability to be curious and open at the same time about ideas and exploration. So the INTJ can have some strong views and some strong opinions on things, but they've got that NI that's still open to and is always open to new data to help inform their thinking. So engaging with an INTJ, it can be important to have your views, have your ideas and your thoughts, actually express that side of yourself will actually help an INTJ engage with you. But at the same time, it being an exploration and and there be an openness to it for new thoughts and new ways of seeing things to come to the forefront. I think if someone comes to an INTJ with just, this is what I think, end of story, well then, in a way, there's no conversation, there's no intellectual space, only unless the INTJ wants to challenge some of those opinions, and that be the intellectual space that gets engaged on. But I think for the most part, having one's own thoughts and ideas and opinions clearly expressed for the purpose of exploration and curiosity and open questions and things like that can be a stimulating, an intellectually stimulating environment for the INTJ to explore the world of ideas. For the INTJ, there seems to be, in regards to their introverted feeling side of themselves, I guess there's a bell-shaped curve for this, but it tends to be either the INTJs either report having lots of strong feelings going on underneath, or there's a lack of connectedness to their FI. It's this elusive sort of thing, or that could actually exist in the same person. In regards to that introverted feeling side, I sometimes think that the best way to either help an INTJ get in touch with their feeling side, or to maybe promote, I guess, more of an atmosphere to enable that side of themselves to come forward a little more is to create you could say, an intellectual environment that is sound, in that it's like we can create a comfortable environment when the logic and the ideas are sound and not uncomplicated in a when I say uncomplicated, I mean because we can have very complex thoughts about the world, but that it's not messy, it's not got huge amounts of loose ends. And I think in an interaction with an INTJ, creating promoting like a sound, logical atmosphere that creates like a stillness or something like this. I'm sort of going out on a limb on this one, but creating a stillness for their deeper self, if you like, to be seen or at least be experienced. And I kind of just picture like, I think I was going to say this later, but sometimes I think the INTJ, when it comes to their emotions, it kind of goes into what I just said before, but it's like if we looked at like a funnel, it's like looking down into themselves. The funnel either goes down and out to this sort of broad awareness of what they are feeling personally, or the funnel goes this way, so it's like looking down, but it goes down into this tiny like opening down in here, if you like, and it's really hard to get a strong sense of what's going on underneath the surface emotionally in that realm of themselves. There could be one or the other taking place, and I think that maybe having like a safe space, a safe environment for the INTJ, an intellectual environment that is both stimulating and sound, can create a stillness that could actually open that funnel up within themselves for them to get a greater sense of what might be going on underneath the surface for themselves, emotionally speaking. And with that opening up, again, it's at the moment we're talking about the INTJ's relationship with themselves, could enable them to be more congruent with their emotional realm within the context of a relationship and a connection. I'm going out on a limb a little bit on that. It's more like I wonder if, and what do people think about that? So I think an extension of what I'm saying, which sort of ties into everything else that I've said already, is when an INTJ, when they have their space respected, when the intellectual environment is both stimulating and engaging and interesting, but respectful, when you could say their NI and their TE are respected, that that kind of environment could enable them to connect both to themselves and to the other person. They'll have a greater chance of accessing that part of themselves when that's taking place. Now, I'm sort of saying this because I think a lot of the time the INTJ space and world is misunderstood and not understood, recognized. The INTJ is just often dealing with people that don't get them. And so they don't have a lot of opportunity to go deeper because people are breaking the rules all the time. They're breaking their intellectual rules, their physical space rules, they're offending them logically, and that sort of thing. So I think with what I'm saying in the last sort of few minutes is if someone can get the INTJ and not offend them in those ways, it could actually create a space that's unique for the INTJ and the other person, because the INTJ often doesn't have an opportunity to go deeper with other people because they don't feel got, they don't feel understood and appreciated, at least appreciated in the sense of respected, I think is a better word. Now, this introverted feeling side of this video and what I've been saying throughout, at least recently in the video, I think that could be potentially quite a actualizing experience for the INTJ, in the sense that their SE is manageable, the sensory environment they're in is safe, and it's like, you could almost say that the sensory environment doesn't have an issue in it, so then it ceases to exist. In a sense, it's when an INTJ and even the INFJ is too involved in the extroverted sensing environment that it's problematic. So it's when the SE is really not, in some respects, when it's not noticed, that you could almost say the INTJ or even the INFJ is grounded. So you've got the NI that has the intellectual side and the extroverted thinking. That intellectual component of them is intact, but it's intact within the within a connection with somebody else. Their SE is of a almost the SE is almost a non-issue because there's no issue in the sensory environment. Kind of creates a atmosphere for the INTJ to tap into their FI, either more consciously, and especially consciously within the context of being present with somebody else, could have a sort of an actualizing kind of element to it. Again, I would just encourage INTJs, if there's any of that is making any sense, to comment, or if you see it slightly differently, to let us know. So just going over, sort of looking at things more from an intellectual perspective, is you'll know quite quickly if the INTJ wants to be around you. Basically, if they stay there and they're listening, it's more likely because they want to be, rather than them being polite. I think INTJs can be polite to a certain degree before they would just need to move on. So if an INTJ is making it clear that they want you around, then you're probably important, or they're basically just enjoying your company. Now that's no different to any other human being, but the why of why the INTJ wants you around is different to the other types. It's often more around that intellectual stimulation and ability to have those kind of conversations. But at the same time, when those conversations aren't taking place, when you are around and not communicating, you're not a burden to them. You're not pestering them for lots and lots of one-on-one time, or being emotionally clingy or needy. If you're, again, more contained within yourself, then you're probably going to be more attractive to an INTJ, and they'll want you around a little more. It's not to say that they don't want to have connections with people that maybe more complex than that, at least complex emotionally. I think INTJs can have big hearts for sure, but I guess we're talking about more their inner sanctum, their inner space. That's where they're probably a lot more guarded than perhaps some of the other areas that they might be involved in their lives, where they see a need to accommodate more of those. I guess the problematic nature of the emotional realm. They may be more accommodating and almost choose to be more empathetic when it's sort of outside of their inner sanctum. So sometimes I wonder, when communicating with an INTJ, that there can be this sort of, it's almost the NITE is like a dichotomy. I think that's sort of what's coming through a little bit as I'm making this video. Like when talking to an INTJ, there could be the sense of the INTJ both responding to direct communication, direct ideas or direct opinions and perspectives and so on, but also appreciating more indirect kind of exploration of ideas. And I would say the best would be a combination of both. With it too explorative without any sort of solidness to it, could be a little airy-fairy and maybe to a certain degree or at some point that could become a bit exhausting without it having some structure to it. But at the same time, communication that is only structure-based, in the sense that it's just solid thought after solid thought, probably isn't going to be very interesting either to the INTJ, who's always wanting to challenge their thinking and challenge their ideas with fresh and new ways of seeing things. And maybe this ties into what I was saying before about when the NI and the TE are both respected and valued and there's a comfort zone there, could sort of help create an atmosphere for them to sort of drop into their FI. I think you could almost say that for the INTJ, their mind is their heart. It's like one and the same thing. Again, that's not a black and white statement. It's just a way of seeing the self that might help to understand things. That in that you could almost say, you know, you get access to the INTJ's heart when you access the mind. Now that could be the case for anyone. We could say that about all of us, regardless of type. But I think the INTJ has a more of a leaning towards that idea that the mind is more important. You could say that mind is more important than the heart. But I think in some respects the mind is the heart for the INTJ. I think some of the reasons why INTJs might be seen as cold or closed off is because they're, like what I said before, they're having a relationship with themselves, in the sense an intellectual relationship with themselves. So they're thinking about what they're thinking about, and when an INTJ is doing that, it could seem as though they're either not interested or not respecting you, or snobbish or something like that. But I think for the most part, the INTJ, especially if they're doing that after you've said something, they're actually very much respecting you, because they're thinking about what you've said and they're thinking about what they think about what you've said. And so it's just recognizing that if that's taking place, that it's probably the opposite. It's not disrespect, it's actually respect. Just in regards to INTJ and INFJ differences, I think, like, when we think about the problems of this world, I think the INTJ and the INFJ see the same problems, or have the ability to see the same problems, but think about them in vastly different ways. And you know, just generally speaking, the INFJ is going to be looking at, like, you could say, the emotional state of the world and the people in it, and kind of despair in regards to the amount of pain that people are in, yet at the same time see all the possibilities to get out of that pain. I think the INTJ, I sometimes think that they're maybe bewildered at the amount of emotional pain and crises going on in the world. Whereas the INTJ, I guess they've got that feeling, kind of empathy response to what they're seeing. Whereas the INTJ, I get the sense, I suppose, that they look at some of the craziness that goes on in the world with, I don't know if it's utter amazement or like just because like looking at it logically, like how crazy the world is. I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say there, but I just think the INTJ might. I just maybe it's a question for INTJs about when they see the state of the world and the many problems that humanity has, about sort of how they see it. You know, I don't think it's like, oh, I don't care, or, you know, whatever. Yeah, I'm curious about what INTJs might, how INTJs might respond to that question of what do they think when they see the state of the world and the problems that the world has. I think for the INTJ and the INFJ, they're both types are full of dichotomy and contradictions. But I think for the INFJ kind of really does connect with those contradictions and the paradoxes and the dichotomous nature that they can sometimes find in themselves and in their position in the world, to the point of forming some of their identity around those contradictions and misunderstandings and so on. I think the INTJ certainly engages with those contradictions, and maybe the contradictions are formed out of NI, about being able to see things from all these different sort of perspectives and angles. But I just get the sense the INTJ doesn't really form a lot of their identity around that. They certainly can acknowledge it as part of their thinking process, as part of their evaluating problems, but they don't get in the way of what they're processing. And I would say that's almost intentional. Whereas the INFJ forms some identity around dichotomy and contradictions and feeling misunderstood in the world, I think the INTJ sees them, acknowledges them, but then moves them to one side, or at least on one level can put them to one side as a way of processing information and material, but can also to some extent include them. Not to some extent, I think they have a mastery at being able to include contradiction and dichotomous ideas and perspectives, and use it as part of their process to solving problems and things like that. So I think there's like that same but different for the INTJ and the INFJ. One of the ways I've sort of look at the INTJ TE, I guess TE and NI, is like the TE is like the rudder of a boat. It helps to chart a course and allowing sort of like a process to take place or a direction to take place within thinking. But the NI is kind of like you could either look at it as the wind or the sail, or let's say both. That the NI is taking information from every direction, and allowing it all to come in. But some of that wind, if you like, gets trapped in the sail of the boat being the INTJ, and the rudder kind of carves a course in the water, if you like, towards a destination. So that sort of TE that keeps them on a path. To some extent, it's probably an oversimplification, but that sort of NI comes in and all around the INTJ to help push the INTJ towards a conclusion or towards an idea. So in one sense, the INTJ, it's like they look really still, and they seem to have on one level quite still eyes, in the sense, I don't know how to describe it any other way than that. In a way, it's like it's like almost you have the eyes to see that or you don't. but they can kind of carry this sort of stillness. But behind it, behind the stillness of the eyes, if you like, is this sort of NI storm, and not a chaotic storm. You could say it's like the perfect storm, the perfect intellectual storm, where the NI is just kind of taking in all of this information all the time. It can kind of give them a little bit of an out of this world look to them sometimes. So yeah, they look still, but they're not on the inside in a lot of ways, at least not in their mind. So in their eyes sort of camouflage that a little bit. And in a sense, I think because of their ability to take in a lot of information, you could get the wrong idea that the INTJ agrees with you. Because they're listening, let's say they're listening to what you're saying, and they're listening and they're nodding and they're hearing what you're saying, and that nodding doesn't necessarily mean at all that they agree with you. It means that they're receiving you, they're taking it in, they're open to what you have to say, they're curious about what you're going to say next, and they're wondering where you're going to go and what this all means. But then so there's this outward taking in what you're saying, but certainly in no way does it mean that they agree with what you're saying. That in a sense is between their that comes down to their conscious relationship with themselves about what they think about what you're saying. I made this note that it seems like the INTJ, they're traditional in the sense of TE traditional. So again, their NI is very non-traditional in the sense of it's so open to all of these other ways of seeing problems and seeing things. But their TE is kind of traditional in the sense that it has to have logic to it. It has to have I guess what I'm trying to say in all of that is like TE has more of a traditionalness to it, in that it has a way of assessing things. It has a you could say information has to have a predictable logic to it, and you could almost say that sort of TE is sort of set in its ways, and that's might be what I mean by traditional, whereas NI is very unset in its ways, in the sense that it can come at things from all manner of different angles and so on. I sometimes think that intuitive thinkers can be a lot less abrasive than sensing thinkers, and it probably just comes down to the fact that the intuitives are more interested in ideas and the intellect, as opposed to the senses that are sort of more focusing on the concrete reality of things, how things are sort of implemented in the world. And so I think in a sense, the intuition can kind of round out and soften out some of that TE abrasiveness that thinking can sometimes have for people. Whereas I think the STs, their reactions to things seems to have more of a solidness to it, more of an abrasiveness to it. And I'm sort of mindful that this could come across as judgmental, and that's certainly not the case. It's just attempting to understand, and in a sense it's about trying to move away from the potential judgments that we can have with other types. And again, senses with other senses probably aren't going to feel that abrasiveness as much as intuitives might, or at least NFs might. And NTs might not experience an ST's abrasiveness in regards to what they're thinking or what they think. The NT might not have as much of a reaction to that because they have that thinking preference. So, but just to make the point, I suppose that for people on the receiving end of NTs versus STs, that the INTJ's thinking is probably not going to be as harshly communicated. Even though I don't think STs are intentionally trying to be harsh, it's just different in the way in which we communicate. But anyway, for what that's worth. I wonder when it comes to the area of manipulation, and I mean the INTJ picking up manipulation in others, how they do that. Because I think for the INFJ, sure, for the INTJ and the INFJ, their NI is certainly going to be recognizing some things, kind of weighed down below the surface. But I think Fi has a way of sort of picking up deception and so on in people. I'm wondering how the INTJ picks up that deception, whether it's more around the information that they're hearing versus what they're seeing from the other as they're communicating. I'm sure there's a bit of both there as well, but I wonder if for the INTJ, in a sense, their TE picks up that there's something that's just not lining up in the way that things are being said or how they're saying it or the words that are being used. And that their TE kind of picks up on there's more going on here than meets the eye. And that it may have an Fi kind of unsettledness going on underneath that kind of informs them that this person is like there could be some deception going on. Again, I guess that's a question or a curiosity to ask INTJs if they've gotten this far in the video. So in regards to the NI and the NITI loop, sometimes, like I said earlier in the video, I sometimes feel like the INTJ is kind of like trapped. Their Fi is like trapped deep down inside of themselves. However, I've also heard INTJs talk about, like acknowledge that they have a lot of feelings going on. There just seems to be this kind of, if that's true for some INTJs, that it seems like when they're around people, that third function kind of, gets pushed down, if you like, or moved away from, so that they can NITE the situation. Whereas when they are in their private space, that Fi has probably got more room to exist as maybe part of their processing of whatever it is that they're engaging in. But it seems as though some INTJs, it's like their Fi is elusive to them, so it's not even available to them privately very much. So I think in some respects, being alone for the INTJ is a way of facilitating or at least welcoming some of the Fi processing. So in one sense, I guess you've got the sort of healthy NI Fi loop, which is in their private space, their NI is sort of meditating on some things, and it's kind of like, what do I feel about what I'm thinking about, or what I'm sensing, and then what I'm feeling about, informing the NI, and then back to the Fi, and sort of around it goes, as a way of processing, not as a way of getting lost. But I think maybe for INTJs, like any type, when there is an emotional issue, when there is a pain, or whether there are unresolved issues for the INTJ of a relation, from a relationship or even childhood, if that NI Fi loop can be like I was going to say a closed system, but the positive one is also a closed system in a sense, the positive NI Fi loop, but let's say it's chronically closed, so it's just NI Fi kind of looping, but maybe even to some extent not consciously. So the positive NI Fi loop can help with deeper processing about things, whereas the negative NI Fi loop could be maybe more of an unconscious process, or just a distressing one, where it's conscious, painful, but nothing gets resolved. If an INTJ is finding themselves stuck in an Ni Fi loop, in the sense that it's nothing's being resolved, or it's distressing and painful and nothing's really happening, they need to get out of that loop, essentially by either talking to somebody to get their what they think about what's going on inside of them out, and or having feedback from somebody else about what's going on. Bring the human element to essentially to the emotional problem. So when it's an Ni Fi negative loop, it's most likely because of some kind of a relationship issue. And if the INTJ goes away only privately to resolve it, to a certain extent it might not be resolved, because there's a theory that problems or woundings that we carry within the context of relationship can only heal in the context of relationship. I.e., if trust is damaged in a relationship, creating a wounding, then no amount of going away and thinking about it and will fix that or heal that. It will only essentially be healed through building trust in a new relationship, or at least working through the issues of trust with somebody else to unlock it and release it, so that they get out of that Ni Fi loop and resolve what that loop is. I think there's some truth for the INTJ in the area of feeling that part of them can be probably experienced quite intensely when they make a mistake, especially if other people see the mistake. And it's probably in connection with maybe a role that they have, whether that's work, school, whatever it could be, just something that they were responsible for that had an error in it or a mistake in it, that they could just feel like this INTJ shame about that and feel that quite deeply. Although I think, again, they'll try and hide that with all their muster. And at the same time, though, to the level that they're ashamed will be to the level that they're self-motivated to fix the problem. And they would, whereas someone else might hide from their mistake and not take responsibility for it, the INTJ is usually very highly motivated to fix their error. There's a real sense of responsibility that they carry when it comes to resolving the mistakes that they may make. I guess the good thing for the INTJ is that would probably be a very rare occurrence, at least as they get older, because of the amount of energy they put in trying not to make mistakes and perfecting their ideas and their systems. The energy that they put into doing that essentially shields them from the shame that they could feel if they did make a mistake. I think some INTJs have a hard time switching their brain off, and while being alone is their sanctuary, it can also be where they are most highly stimulated, because they're usually engaging with what they're interested in, and whatever they're reading or researching creates a very highly stimulating intellectual space for them. And so it's important that, whereas other types you'd be like, well, go and have some alone time to unwind, that's probably not the case for the INTJ in some respects. It's probably more them going away, they're going to wind themselves up, if you like, with their intellectual engagement. And so it's important that the INTJ also incorporates or is mindful of the need to have alone time and reduce that stimulation, so that they can, I think in a sense, ground themselves in an SE sense, be aware of their physical environment, at least to the level that helps to bring a settledness. Because NI can kind of take us, the NI DOM can often be not connected to the sensor environment at all. So sometimes, like even listening to certain kinds of music or some form of meditation or mindfulness or contemplation can help the INTJ to quieten their mind and just become gently connected to their extroverted sensing environment. And I think that also kind of stimulates an awareness of the emotional feeling part of themselves. And that strategy or that technique can be a helpful way to, you could say, round out the cognitive functions about sort of self-actualizing on a broader level. But at the very least, sort of becoming aware of the emotional. It might be why a number of INTJs have reported over the time that music helps them to feel, and it could just be, it could be a range of reasons, but it could be that the INTJ is able to, in a sense, when they're on their own, they think about what they think about, and like I said before, when they're with other people, they're having a connectedness with the other person and a connectedness with themselves. That when it comes to music, it's like the removing of the other person and bringing the music in as something to engage with is a lot less complicated in a way. Like to me, it sounds like it just gives them freedom to feel. They're not dealing with another person and having their extroverted thinking part of themselves activated. Perhaps listening to music helps to sort of soothe their thinking a little bit and help them to go to their feeling. Again, that's just a thought. I wonder what other INTJs, what you guys think about what I'm saying here. And I like to think that an INTJ that starts to drop into that introverted feeling part of themselves in a sense of development, not like in the grip dropping into, but just a stillness of the other two functions to enable a quietness that helps to feel, if you like, helps to be informed about what they feel about what they think about. That development of their FI values, or becoming more aware of their FI values, and also just the awareness of what they feel about what's going on in their world or whatever it is they're dealing with, will then inform the thinking, and it'll be kind of like, I guess you call it the positive maybe it's a positive TE FI loop, in that what they're doing has a deeper purpose to it than just trying to be logical and systematic. Maybe there's something that FI kind of helps to maybe broaden the meaning or the why to that TE function. And I think just in what I said there is particularly important for the INTJ that might have come out of a difficult childhood or difficult relationships with their caregivers, where they might have got wounded or hurt in some way, that their emotional realm could be a very elusive place to deal with or work through or negotiate. And getting down into that part of themselves will actually help to resolve those issues. So there's a sense that when the INTJ becomes still in their cognitions, still in their TE, and their NI, if you like, is kind of like a still breeze, it helps them, that space, and maybe music or a gentle conversation, or just being alone in a form of meditation or something like that, or mindfulness, just enables them to get in touch with that FI underneath the surface, and be able to integrate that side of themselves. So once again, this video is probably going to be a lot longer than I ever intended it to be, but I really do hope that there is some good, just general knowledge that's come through this video, but maybe more importantly, hopefully some new ways, or some unique ways, or fresh ways, or whatever, of looking at the INTJ, both for the INTJ to get to know themselves, but also for others to get to know the INTJ. And I hope this video has really resonated with the INTJs. I've certainly have hoped that it would, and that maybe this video gives others maybe a holistic way of seeing the INTJ. Again, like I said at the start of the video, some of this stuff might not land right like the nail on the head, but maybe like some of this video might just be about introducing ways of thinking about all of this to maybe lead towards some fresh or new ways of seeing the INTJ. That is at least my hope. Or either that, or it's just an average video, but even that's fine if it speaks to the INTJ. So I really hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you've made it to the end, I applaud you to get this far, and I really appreciate you watching to the end. And I appreciate it if you would give it a thumbs up if something about this video has helped in any way, shape or form. And I invite comments from both INTJs and other types, either confirming or speaking into some aspect of this video. And for the non-INTJs, has this been your experience? Does this resonate with your experience of INTJs? And I just hope this video has found you well, and I'll see you again in another video.